I was standing on the front step of a house I had co-signed for when my daughter-in-law opened the door just wide enough to look at me the way you look at a stranger who has knocked on the wrong address. Not a smile, not a come in, just that look. "She's busy," my son said from somewhere behind her. He didn't come to the door himself. I had driven 2 hours from Sudbury. I had brought a casserole dish wrapped in a tea towel because that is what I do. That is what I have always done. Because somewhere along the way, I decided that showing up with food was the safest way to show up at all. I stood there, holding that dish in both hands, and I thought, I have been paying their hydro bill for 11 months. I drove home in the rain without going inside. That was the moment I started counting. My name is Dorothy. I am 67 years old. I worked for 31 years as a registered nurse at Health Sciences North, and I retired with a pension that is comfortable enough if you are careful, which I have always been. My husband Gerald passed away 4 years ago from a cardiac event that the doctors said was sudden. Though looking back now, I am not sure anything about that year was sudden. Everything in that year felt like it had been building for a very long time. When Gerald died, I was left with the house paid off, a modest RRSP, and my pension coming in every month like a quiet clock. I was not rich. I was not struggling. I was what my mother would have called settled. My son. I will call him my son because that is what he is. That is the only name that matters, is 34. He works in IT project management, has for 6 years, makes what I know to be a decent salary because he told me once, proudly, when he first got the position. His wife, who I will call my daughter-in-law, works in marketing at a firm downtown. They do not have children yet, though for a while they said they wanted them soon. They live in a 2-bedroom condo in Ottawa's Centretown that they chose, that they furnished, that they decorated with furniture I recognize from expensive stores, though I said nothing. The payments started small, the way these things always do. It was my son's car insurance first. He called me in October, 2 years after the wedding, and said the renewal had come in higher than expected, and they were a little tight that month. I said, of course. I sent $300 by Interac. I did not think about it again. Then it was his phone plan. Then it was her phone plan. Then it was the condo's hydro bill, which surprised me because I thought that was included in their fees, but apparently it was not. Apparently there was a separate account. Apparently it had been running behind since the spring. I want to be honest about something. I did not feel taken advantage of. Not then. I felt needed. That is a different thing, and it took me a long time to understand the difference. When you have spent 31 years in nursing, you know something about being needed. You know what it does to a person to feel useful. I was 65, newly widowed, living alone in a house with Gerald's reading chair still beside the window. The payments felt like a cord between us, like proof that my son still reached for me. So I did not question it. I just paid. By the time 18 months had passed, I had paid their car insurance renewals twice. I was covering both their phone bills, the hydro, the internet, her gym membership at a downtown fitness studio that I looked up once online and understood immediately was not a budget gym. I was sending money toward what my son described as a cash flow problem that seemed to resurface every 6 to 8 weeks with the regularity of a season. I had also quietly paid the security deposit on the condo when they first moved in because they were short and the landlord needed it by Friday, and my son called on a Wednesday night, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. I kept no records. That was my mistake, or maybe it was not a mistake. Maybe it was just the way I had always loved, with no expectation of accounting. It was my neighbor Patsy who first said something. We were having tea in her kitchen after our Thursday morning walk, the kind of walk we have taken for 11 years, rain or shine, because Patsy's doctor told her to, and my doctor told me to, and somewhere along the way it became the part of the week I looked forward to most. She asked how my son was doing. I told her. I did not mean to tell her everything, but Patsy has a way of asking that makes you feel like withholding something is a form of dishonesty, and I have never been comfortable with dishonesty. When I finished, she put her mug down. "Dorothy," she said, "how much a month do you think that is?" I had never added it up. I did that afternoon, sitting at my own kitchen table with my reading glasses on and my banking app open on my phone. The number was not what shocked me. The number was $1,840 a month. What shocked me was that I had been paying it without thinking for 19 months. 19 months. I sat with that for a long time. I want to tell you about the trip, because the trip is the thing I still cannot fully reconcile. In February, my son sent me a photo. He and his wife in Tulum. Him in a white linen shirt, her in a swimsuit that I recognized again as expensive by the way it fit, and the way she was holding herself in it, the way people hold themselves when they know they look expensive. They were at what appeared to be a rooftop restaurant. There were drinks on the table with paper straws. The sky behind them was the specific shade of orange that only exists in places people fly to, specifically for that color. He captioned it, "Finally got away. Needed this." That same week, I had transferred $420 toward their January Hydro and Rogers bill because he had texted me that they were a bit stretched after the holidays. I did not say anything about the photo. I saved it. I do not know why I saved it. I think some part of me was already beginning to build a case, not against him, but for myself. Building evidence that what I was feeling, that slow, quiet wrongness, was not jealousy or smallness, but something accurate. In March, I found the credit card. I was helping my son file some paperwork. He had asked me to help him organize some documents for a benefits claim, and I was at their condo going through a drawer when I found a credit card statement I was not meant to see. I did not snoop. It was simply there, in a drawer I had been directed to open, in a folder beside the one I needed. I looked at it for a long time. The statement was for a card I had not known existed. The balance was $14,200. The transactions included a hotel in Vancouver over the long weekend in October, a charge from a boutique I did not recognize but looked up later and understood was a clothing retailer. 3 charges from a restaurant in the Glebe that I knew because Gerald and I had been there once for our anniversary, and I remembered thinking it was the most we had ever spent on a meal. There were also 2 charges from a floral subscription service, monthly. For 18 months, they had been sending themselves flowers every month. I put the statement back exactly as I had found it. I closed the drawer. I finished with the paperwork. I stayed for another 45 minutes and had tea and said nothing. On the drive home, I had to pull over twice. The nausea was not about the money. I want to be clear about that because people will think it was about the money, and it was not. Not entirely. The nausea was about the shape of it. The shape of a person standing at your door, holding casserole in the rain, while you send yourself flowers every month. The shape of reaching for your mother when you need something and pulling your hand back when you do not. I had loved my son every day of his 34 years. I had sat with him in emergency rooms, driven him to and from university in Waterloo 4 times a year for 4 years. I had let him move home for 8 months when he and his then-girlfriend broke up and he needed time. I had bought him his first car at 22. A used Civic that he drove for 6 years, and I had stood at the back of a church and watched him marry a woman I told myself I was still getting to know. I asked myself, on that drive home, pulling over on the 17 with my hazard lights on, whether I had ever actually gotten to know her, or whether I had simply been performing the role of a mother-in-law who was trying. I thought about my own mother. She never would have accepted this. She was a woman who had grown up with nothing in Cape Breton and had no patience for what she called soft entitlement. She would have said something in the first month. She would have said it plainly, without cruelty, but without apology either. I had not said it. I had sent the money and saved the photo and told myself it was love. That night, I sat at Gerald's desk. I still think of it as Gerald's desk, though I have used it every day for 4 years, and I made a list, not an emotional list, a practical one. I wrote down every payment I could remember or find a record of. I went back through my banking history as far as I could. I transferred between Interac records, credit card transactions, the notes I kept on my phone. The list was 47 items long, 47 separate payments over 22 months. The total was $31,640. I read that number several times. I read it the way you read a diagnosis, slowly, letting each word arrive separately before the sentence finishes. $31,640. I closed the laptop. I made myself a cup of chamomile. I sat in Gerald's chair by the window, and I looked at the backyard, which was dark and still had snow on the far end by the fence where the sun doesn't reach until April, and I thought about what I wanted, not what I should do, not what a good mother does, what I, Dorothy, actually wanted. What I wanted was to stop, not angrily, not with a speech. I did not want a confrontation. I did not want to watch anyone grovel or explain themselves or cry at my kitchen table. I did not have the energy for that performance, and I did not trust that it would change anything. I just wanted to stop. I did not tell my son I had found the statement. I did not tell him about the list. I did not even tell Patsy what I had decided. Not yet. I simply stopped. The next time the text came, it was a Thursday, mid-April, my son asking if I could help with their renewal on the intact home insurance because things are tight right now. You know how spring gets. I read it 3 times. Then I typed, "I'm sorry. I can't help with that right now." I pressed send before I could reconsider. Then I sat very still for about 10 minutes, waiting for something inside me to break open, the way I had feared it would. The guilt I had been carrying for 22 months, like a preemptive punishment. It did not break open. It was quiet. He called that evening. I let it ring. He called again the following morning. I answered that one because I had decided I would not hide. I would simply not negotiate. "I just can't right now," I said. "I hope you find a solution." He asked if everything was okay. I said yes. He asked if something had happened. I said no. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, in a voice I recognized from when he was 16, and I had told him I was not driving him somewhere, "Okay, fine." I said I loved him. He said he did too, in the way people say it when they are also a little bit angry, and we hung up. I want to be honest about the weeks that followed because I think people imagine it was satisfying immediately, and it was not. There were nights I lay awake rehearsing conversations I had decided not to have. There were Sundays when I drove past their neighborhood on my way to and from my sister's place in Nepean and wondered whether I should stop in, whether silence was cruelty, whether I was the one doing harm now. I called my sister Eleanor one of those Sunday nights. She is 3 years older than me and has always been the person I call when I need someone to say the plain truth without dressing it up. She said, "You paid for 22 months. They will survive without it. The question is whether you can survive continuing." That was the only thing she said. We talked about other things after that, her garden, her grandchildren, a trip she and her husband Frank were planning to the Cabot Trail in August. And somehow that conversation, the ordinary parts of it, the parts that had nothing to do with my son, felt like the most nourishing thing I had eaten in a long time. I am a practical woman. I did not wait to see what would happen to them before I started living differently. I booked a 10-day trip to Portugal with Patsy for September. I joined the watercolor class at the community center that I had been putting off for 3 years because it conflicted with Thursdays, and Thursdays had become the day I was available for financial emergencies that were not mine. I stopped being available in the way I had been available. It felt, I will admit, like learning to breathe in a different rhythm, not always comfortable. but steadily, increasingly mine. Over the following 4 months, I heard very little from my son. A text on my birthday, a short call at Christmas that was pleasant in the surface way that calls are pleasant when two people are being careful with each other. He did not ask for money again. I do not know whether his wife knew what had changed or what she thought about it. I heard from my sister that they had downsized, that they had moved out of the Centretown condo into a smaller apartment in Kanata, that my son had taken on some freelance work in the evenings. I did not feel satisfied by this information. I want to be clear about that too. It did not give me pleasure. What I felt was something more like recognition, that the life they had been living had required a subsidy. I had been providing without ever naming it, and now, without the subsidy, they were living the life that actually fit them. That is not punishment. That is just the truth reasserting itself. My son came to Sudbury in November, alone, without calling ahead. He knocked on the door on a Saturday morning when I was in the kitchen making oatmeal. He was standing on the step with his hands in his jacket pockets, and he looked, for the first time in several years, like my son. Not my son, the project manager, not my son, the husband, not my son on a rooftop in Tulum. Just my son, looking a little tired, a little uncertain, a little like the boy who used to sit on the counter while I made breakfast when he was 7 years old. I opened the door and stepped back so he could come in. We sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. He did not apologize, not in the way I once might have needed, not with the full accounting I had sometimes imagined in the dark. What he said was, "I think I let myself believe you had more than you did, because it was easier." I said, "I think I let you." We sat with that for a while. He told me that his wife had not known the full extent of what he had been asking of me, that he had managed the conversations himself, that she knew I had helped, but not how much or how often. I do not know whether I fully believe that. I have decided it does not matter for the purpose of my own peace. What matters is that my son sat in Gerald's kitchen and looked at me like a person who was trying to see clearly, and I looked back at him the same way, and we were both a little ashamed and a little relieved, and very, very tired. He helped me clean up the oatmeal pot before he left. I packed him 2 containers of soup from the freezer because I am still his mother and I will feed him for the rest of my life, whether he deserves it in any particular moment or not. But I packed 2 containers, not 7, 2. He hugged me at the door and said he was sorry. Not the full version, just the beginning of one, the kind that takes a long time to fully arrive. I said I knew. I am writing this from the back porch of a small rental house in the Algarve where Patsy and I are spending 12 days in September. The light here in the late afternoon has that quality of softening everything it touches. There are bougainvillea over the back wall, deep pink, and a cat that is not ours that has been coming around every morning, and Patsy has, of course, already started leaving out water for it. I am drinking a glass of Vinho Verde, and I am thinking about what I want to say to you, whoever is listening to this, wherever you are. I am not angry at my son. I want you to know that. Anger would be simpler, but it is not what I carry. What I carry is something more like clarity about the difference between love and financing someone's comfort, between being needed and being useful, between the door I kept propped open for 22 months and the one I now open and close on my own terms. My pension is mine. The life Gerald and I built is mine. The trip to Portugal is mine. The watercolor class, the Thursday walks, the soup in the freezer, mine. I gave my son 47 payments and 22 months, and I do not regret any of it because it was the price of understanding something I needed to understand about myself. But I am 67 years old. I have, if I am lucky and my health holds and the genetics my mother gave me mean anything, perhaps 20 or 25 good years left. Years where I can travel and walk and paint badly and drink wine and rented houses with bougainvillea over the back wall. I intend to use all of them. I closed the spreadsheet on Gerald's desk that night in March, and I have not opened it again. Not because I have forgotten what was in it, because I have decided that the sum of what I gave is not the sum of what I am worth, and those are two different ledgers entirely. 47 payments, all of them ended, and I have never, in 4 years of widowhood, slept better than I do now. I have thought a lot about what made any of this possible in the first place. Not the payments. Those were just money, and money follows the channels you dig for it. What I mean is the longer pattern underneath. The one that started long before the first Interact transfer, long before the condo security deposit, long before I was standing at a door I had helped pay for in the rain. I think most of us who end up in this position, and I know from talking to women my age that I am not remotely alone in it, get there through something that looks exactly like love. That is the difficult part. It is not naivety. It is not weakness. Exactly. It is that love without a boundary is just a direction, and a direction without a limit will take you somewhere you did not intend to go. What I understand now, sitting with the distance of a year and a half and a glass of wine in Portugal and a cat that is not mine, drinking water off Patsy's porch, is that I was making a choice every single month. I told myself I was not choosing, that I was simply responding, that a mother responds and does not choose, but that is not honest. Every transfer was a decision, and for 22 months I made the same decision, not because I had to, but because I had not yet asked myself what I actually wanted. The question I had never asked was a simple one. Is this sustainable, and is it true? It was not sustainable, and it was not true. Not to who I actually was, not to the life Gerald and I had built carefully over 4 decades, not to what I actually had to give versus what I had been performing that I had to give. When my son told me I should perhaps live less comfortably, he was not being cruel in the way a stranger is cruel. He was revealing something he actually believed, that my comfort was a resource for his use. That is a belief a person does not arrive at suddenly. It builds, quietly, over months and years of evidence that confirms it. And I had been providing that evidence faithfully every 6 to 8 weeks without ever saying a word to the contrary. That is not entirely his failure. It is also mine. What I have learned, and this is the part I wish I could sit down and say plainly to every woman in her 60s who is quietly doing what I was doing, is that the most honest thing you can do for the people you love is to be truthful about what you actually have and who you actually are. Not to perform abundance, not to fill the silences in a relationship with money because money is easier to send than the conversation you are afraid to have. Tree too soft for me was not arriving at some grand understanding all at once. It was sitting at Gerald's desk on a Tuesday night in March with my reading glasses and my banking app and being willing to add up the number, the willingness to look clearly at what I had been avoiding looking at. That willingness is the beginning of everything. And the part that required actual courage was sending that first text. I'm sorry, I can't help with that right now. 8 words. I sat with my phone in my hands for 4 minutes before I pressed send. 4 minutes is not a long time. It was the longest 4 minutes of the previous 2 years. My son came to Sudbury in November and sat at my kitchen table and began the long work of seeing me as a person rather than a resource. That matters. But even if he had not come, even if the relationship had stayed at that cool, surface-level distance, I would still have Portugal. I would still have Patsy and the Thursday walks and the watercolor class and the 2 containers of soup I chose to pack rather than the 7 I once would have sent out of guilt. 47 payments, every single one of them my choice, and ending them, that was my choice too. I am 67 years old. I intend to keep choosing.